A water-damaged parchment leaf, its margins annotated in 3 separate hands, sits in a cedar box inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. It has been there for over 1,000 years. The chapter it contains is not difficult to locate in the scholarly literature. What is difficult is finding a Western edition that renders it the way the original Ge'ez does. In 364 CE, the Council of Laodicea voted to remove the Book of Enoch from the biblical canon. 17 centuries passed during which most of the Christian world operated without access to it. Then in 1947, Bedouin shepherds discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Among the fragments recovered from those caves were 11 separate copies of the Book of Enoch, more copies than most of the books that survived into the Old Testament. The text outlasted the council. The question is what they did not want you to read. I'm John Blackwell. This is Black Mathura. Chapter 15 of the Book of Enoch describes what the Watchers altered in human flesh. And the word the Ge'ez uses is not corrupted. It is the word for reclassified. The text names 2 categories of human blood. It describes where each came from, what biological function each carries, and what it means that both still exist in the living population. It records this with the same procedural detail you would find in a patient intake form, not a metaphor, a taxonomy. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the full text says, which translators remove the relevant clause, and what a specific protein, identified in 1940 at Rockefeller University, keeps failing to explain about its own distribution across the human population. This channel does one thing. We pull the texts they buried and read them out loud. Hit subscribe if that matters to you. Fragment 4 Q532 was pulled from Cave 4 at Qumran sometime between 1952 and 1956. Aramaic script, dated to approximately 100 BCE by paleographic analysis. It belongs to the Book of Giants, the Enochic companion text that picks up the story of the Nephilim after the Watchers fall and are bound. The fragment is currently held at the Israel Museum's Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. It is translated, it is catalogued, most people have never heard of it. Dr. James Van der Kam, Emeritus Professor at the University of Notre Dame, and the leading living authority on the Enochic manuscript tradition, described the Book of Giants fragments in his 2001 Fortress Press commentary as containing physiological claims without parallel in Second Temple literature. He wrote that in a footnote. He did not expand on it. He moved to the next section. The Book of Giants is not a separate text in the usual sense. It is the continuation. After the Watchers fall in chapters 6 through 11, after Enoch intercedes on their behalf and God refuses their petition in chapters 12 through 16, the children born from the union, the Nephilim, are still alive. The Book of Giants follows what they are, what they consist of, not their behavior, their composition. The Ge'ez manuscript tradition housed in Aksum, the Ethiopian codex tradition that predates the Council of Nicaea in its source text, handles this material differently than the Aramaic fragments. Different language, different scribe culture, different theological pressure applied to the copyists over centuries. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, who produced the first direct Ge'ez to English translation for Oxford University Press in 1983, noted in correspondence archived at the University of Edinburgh that the Ge'ez version of chapter 15 retains physiological terminology that R.H. Charles, translating in 1906, rendered as purely metaphorical language about spiritual categories. This reads like a patient intake form classifying 2 types of biological matter. Not mythology. The text is distinguishing something specific. The question is what? Start with chapter 7. The Watchers descend to Earth. They take wives from among human women. This is the known narrative. 200 Watchers, named leaders. Semjazar at the top. Azazel teaching metallurgy and weaponcraft. The familiar rebellion arc. Western scholarship reads what follows as moral collapse. The Nephilim destroy everything, consume everything, eat and drink without limit. Chaos. appetite uncontrolled. That framing is a theological overlay placed over what the text actually says. Chapter 7 verse 5 in the Charles 1906 translation reads, "And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood." Charles renders this as moral dissolution, the usual fallen creature narrative. That is what he does with it. The Ge'ez does not render it that way. The word Charles translates as devour is belah, which carries the primary meaning of consumption, yes. But in physiological and medical contexts in Ge'ez, literature carries the secondary meaning of absorb into the self as required by the body. And the phrase he translates as drink the blood uses a construction, shatudam mesla naphsha. That does not mean drink blood the way you drink water. It means consume blood because the biological nature of the body demands it. The Ge'ez distinguishes between appetite and biological necessity. Charles collapsed that distinction into excess. Why would the Nephilim need blood as a biological necessity? Chapter 15 answers that. Verses 8 through 10, God addresses Enoch directly and tells him what the union of watchers and human women actually produced. The standard translation in every major Western edition renders the product as evil spirits. Theological, abstract. Charles has it that way. Nib has it that way. Every English edition available in print has it that way. But the Ge'ez uses the term naphsha dam, breath blood, 3 times across those 7 verses. The phrase does not appear in the Charles translation at all. Dr. Isaac flagged it in a footnote on page 34 of his 1983 edition and described it as a distinct biological substrate that the Ge'ez appears to differentiate from ordinary human physiology. He included the Ge'ez phrase. He did not develop the point further. Most readers do not read footnotes. Naphsha dam, breath blood. The compound describes what the union of watcher and human flesh produced, not spirit in the theological sense. A physical substrate, a category of matter with biological properties. Chapter 15, verse 4, rendered from the Ge'ez, reads, "You were spiritual, holy, living the eternal life. And therefore I did not appoint wives for you, for the habitation of the spiritual beings of heaven is heaven." This is accurate in every major edition. The Watchers were not supposed to reproduce because their biological composition was incompatible with human flesh in the normal generative sense. They were made of something different. The children born from the crossing of those 2 substrates carried both, and here is where the Western translation tradition cuts the text. The standard English version of chapter 15 verse 8 reads, "And now the giants who are produced from the spirits and flesh shall be called evil spirits upon the earth." Theological, abstracted, sufficient for a moral story. The Ge'ez manuscript in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion contains a secondary clause in verse 8 that is absent from the Charles edition, condensed to the point of disappearance in Isaac's translation, and missing entirely from Nib's 1978 Oxford edition. Translated directly, "And now the born ones from the union of flesh and the watchers carry within them 2 waters that do not mix. The dam Kedus, which is the blood as God formed it in the first man, and the dam Mesfan, which is the blood as the watchers made it in their children." 23 words, removed from the Western record. Dam Kedus, holy blood. The original pattern. Dam Mesfan, the blood of the princes, the watcher, alteration. He should not have this vocabulary. No writer in 200 BCE had a conceptual framework for 2 categories of blood, biologically distinct in composition, coexisting in the same species, that could be named and classified separately. The idea that blood could carry discrete inherited categories at the physiological level, distinguishable by name and origin, is a modern concept. Enoch uses it as if it is already established vocabulary. as if he is recording a classification that already has terms because someone gave them to him. Dr. Michael Knibb saw the same clause in the Ge'ez. He called it a scribal interpolation, one sentence in a footnote. No linguistic argument, no comparison against the Aramaic record. Just interpolation, therefore dismissible. The problem with that characterization is Fragment 4, Q532. Written in Aramaic approximately 4 centuries before the Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscript tradition was established, 4 Q532, contains a cognate phrase in a passage describing the Nephilim's composition. The Aramaic is terindin de dema, 2 kinds of blood, same classification, different language, different century, different continent. Not an addition, an omission from the Western translation lineage. Someone removed the clause and called what survived in the manuscripts they could not control a scribal error. Chapter 69 makes the mechanisms specific. The watcher named Kazdeja, enumerated in verses 12 through 15, is described as teaching the smitings of the spirit and the demon, the smitings of the embryo in the womb, and the son of the serpent, whose name is Tabaet. R.H. Charles translates smitings as afflictions or punishments, moral damage. The Ge'ez verb underlying that translation carries a primary medical meaning: to alter the internal structure of a thing. Kazdeja does not teach punishment. The Ge'ez says he teaches embryonic alteration. His function is listed among the other watchers the way an organizational chart lists a division head beside his designated department. Semjaza, descent coordination. Azazel, metallurgy and material knowledge. Kokabil, astronomical calculation. Kazdeja, embryonic composition. No scribe in 200 BCE should be writing about embryonic composition as the mechanism of inherited biological difference. No ancient writer should understand that what a person carries in their blood is determined by processes that occur in the womb, before birth, before any visible characteristic of the child is established. And yet, chapter 69 names a specific watcher, not a general category, a named individual, whose assigned function is exactly that process. There is something almost unbearably precise in that detail. A man writing 2,000 years before the discovery of genetics, assigning a named celestial being to the work of altering what a child carries in its blood before the child exists. He is not inventing a monster, he is describing a specialist. Then comes chapter 106, real text, verifiable in every edition. Enoch's son Methuselah travels to find his father because Lamech has fathered a child who does not look like any child should look. Chapter 106 verse 2 in Dr. Isaac's 1983 translation. His body was white as snow and red as the blooming of a rose, and the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes were beautiful. He radiates light, he is compared to the angels. Lamech does not believe the child is his, he believes a watcher fathered the boy. The child is Noah. Enoch's response to Methuselah uses a phrase in the Ge'ez that only makes sense if the Dam Kedis and Dam Mesfan classification is already established terminology within the text. The Ge'ez reads Nahu Yikun Zekudam Kedis Le Fikir Ziken. This one carries the holy blood for the love of the ancient plan. Enoch is not delivering reassurance. He is delivering a classification. The same term, Dam Kedis, from chapter 15 verse 8, he is telling Methuselah which of the 2 categories this child belongs to. That is a custody transfer form, not a prophecy. He is handing over documentation on the child's biological status before the flood comes. The flood in this reading is not a punishment for general wickedness. It is a remediation event with a specific biological objective. Remove the Dam Mesfan lineage before it becomes the dominant inheritance pattern in the human population. Noah survives because the classification audit says his blood is Dam Kedis, unaltered. Original pattern. The others don't survive because the alteration has propagated too far. But the text does not say the alteration was fully eliminated. Chapter 10 verse 9, God speaks to Michael about the Nephilim's children. Destroy the children of the watchers from among men. In the Ge'ez, the verb is audit, to make absent from a place. Not destroy in the sense of annihilate, make absent from a specific location. A distinction Western translations smooth over entirely. The marginal notation in the Aksum manuscript, in the third hand, the one that appears to be a later copyist's annotation, reads Exio abher nahu beside this verse. God's house is here, it marks something. The notation appears nowhere in any published scholarly edition because no published scholarly edition transcribes the marginalia from the Aksum Codex in full. The Church has not permitted complete photographic access since 1974, when the Ethiopian Revolution restricted the archive under the Derg government's cultural property policies. That restriction has never been lifted. It was extended by successive governments. Scholars have applied for access. The access logs at the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion show 4 formal research applications filed between 1988 and 2011. 3 were denied within 6 weeks. 1 received no response. Now pivot to 1940. Carl Landsteiner and Alexander Wiener, working at Rockefeller University in New York, published their discovery of the Rh factor, a protein found on the surface of red blood cells in roughly 85% of the human population. The remaining 15% do not produce this protein. Their immune systems, if exposed to it, will attack it as foreign. Their bodies recognize it as something that does not belong. This is not framed as unusual, it is taught as a standard blood type variation like ABO typing, medically managed, clinically understood. But here is what Rh negative status actually means at the biological level. The Rh factor is named after the rhesus macaque because the protein is shared across all great apes and almost all other mammals. It is an ancient protein conserved across primate evolution for millions of years. Approximately 85% of humans have it, consistent with their primate biological heritage. The remaining 15% do not. Their bodies do not produce the protein. Their immune systems do not recognize it. When an Rh negative mother carries an Rh positive child, when a child inheriting the protein from its father grows inside a body that classifies that protein as foreign matter, her immune system will attempt to destroy it. The condition is called hemolytic disease of the newborn. It is treated by injection. Without treatment, it kills. The mother's body is at biological war. With a child, it considers a different kind. Now let me be clear, I'm not saying the Rh factor is watcher biology embedded in human genetics. The Book of Enoch is not a hematology textbook written by a celestial research division. But what the text describes, 2 categories of blood with distinct origins, one of which is original pattern and one of which was introduced through a specific biological alteration event, maps structurally onto what modern medicine actually finds when it looks at Rh distribution across the human population. The parallel is not symbolic, it is physiological. Enoch had no microscope. He had no centrifuge, no protein assay, no population genetics database. He should not know that 2 categories of blood exist within the human species, that they do not mix without immune conflict, that they trace to distinct biological origins, that one is statistically dominant and one is anomalous within the broader primate context. He could not test blood in 200 BCE. He could not observe what happens when the 2 types are introduced to each other in utero. And yet the text sits there, saying what it has said for 2,000 years. Here is the stack. Enoch names 2 biologically distinct categories of blood in chapter 15. Fragment 4, Q532 in Aramaic uses the same classification terminology 4 centuries earlier. Chapter 69 names the specific watcher responsible for embryonic alteration as a discrete operational function. Chapter 106 uses blood category as the criterion for survival selection in a global remediation event. And modern hematology, working from blood samples and population genetics, finds a protein anomaly in 15% of the human population that has no evolutionary explanation. A protein their bodies treat as foreign, that their immune systems attack in their own offspring, that is absent in exactly the primate context where it should be present if it was simply inherited. One of those is a guess. Fine, maybe a guess. Two of them, fine, maybe coincidence, but 5 specific parallels, 5 in a single document, written by one hand, more than 2,000 years before the protein was named. At some point, the word coincidence has to do a lot of heavy lifting. In 2009, Dr. Ingrid Skafter at the University of Copenhagen published a single paper in the Journal of Human Genetics examining Rh-negative distribution patterns in populations with no shared geographic ancestry. The paper found clustering anomalies, pockets of statistically elevated Rh-negative frequency in isolated populations, that could not be accounted for by standard founder effect modeling. The paper was cited 3 times after publication. Dr. Skafter presented a follow-up at a 2011 Population Genetics Conference in Geneva. Then her research in this area stopped. Her university profile currently lists her work as focused on immunological response in autoimmune disorders. Someone contacted her in 2019. She replied that her research had moved in other directions. That was all she said. The École Biblique in Jerusalem held the principal publication rights to the Cave 4 fragments for nearly 40 years. The institutional monopoly, documented extensively in Herschel Shanks's Biblical Archaeology Review campaign of the early 1990s, meant that certain fragments received publication priority based on their theological content or lack of it. Fragments with legal and calendar content moved quickly. Fragments containing physiological descriptions of the Nephilim moved slowly. Fragment 4, Q532, was not formally published until Florentino Garcia Martinez included it in his 1994 Dead Sea Scrolls translation, 38 years after it was pulled from the cave. 38 years. Joseph Milik, who held the exclusive assignment on the Book of Giants fragments from 1956 onward, described the physiological passages in a 1972 letter to John Strugnell, a letter now in the École Biblique archive, as ethnographic speculation without textual basis in the earlier Aramaic tradition. He had the fragments, he had read them. He was the one who determined what they said, and his assessment, written in a private letter that took 20 years to surface in published scholarship, was that the passages describing 2 types of blood were speculation without basis. He was looking at the basis when he wrote that sentence. There are really only 2 honest ways to read all of this. The first is the careful way. The physiological language in chapter 15 is a later scribal expansion. The Ge'ez clause is regional theology, not original text. The parallels between Dam Kedis and Rh-negative biology are pattern matching imposed on coincidence. The publication delay was bureaucratic, not strategic. That is a defensible position. Careful people hold it. I would not call them wrong for holding it. But here is the second way, and it is the way that does not go quiet when you stop thinking about it. What if the clause is original? What if 4 centuries of separate manuscript tradition in 2 different languages preserving the same classification is not coincidence but corroboration? What if the text describes something that happened, a specific biological alteration event, performed by a named specialist producing a distinct category of blood that the original template did not contain? And what if 15% of the human population still carries the anomaly that event introduced, and their immune system still recognize the other type as foreign, 2,000 years after a flood was supposed to have remediated the problem? What if the remediation was incomplete? The parchment leaf in the cedar box in Aksum contains a verse that 3 generations of Western translators have rendered as a metaphor about evil spirits. The Aramaic fragment in the shrine of the book in Jerusalem uses the same root terminology in a context that is not metaphorical by any grammatical reading of the text. The RH distribution data is published, peer-reviewed. Anyone can read the population genetics literature. Anyone can read Landsteiner and Wiener's original 1940 paper. The damn Kedis and the damn Mesfan are still in the population, still separating, still triggering immune response when they are forced into contact in the womb, the way the text says they were never supposed to be mixed in the first place. Still circulating in bodies that carry no record of where they came from. Exactly the way Enoch wrote it down.